In the end, Richard Nixon, and not George Wallace, would become the nation's 37th president. But Wallace, who had received over 10 million votes and carried 5 southern states, had come close to achieving his real goal, deadlocking the election. With a shift of less than 1% of the vote in just 2 more states, he would have had enough electoral votes to throw the election into the House of Representatives. Wallace would have been the kingmaker, delivering the presidency to the party most willing to embrace his issues. Those issues, and the millions of Americans who had supported him, were not about to go away.
In 1968, it is true that the heart of his support remains in the South. But even outside the South, a large minority supports George Wallace. And what I think it represents is this tectonic shift in American politics that takes place in the 1960s. Race riots, backlash against the Great Society programs, the divisions that are exposed by the war in Vietnam. In a sense, American politics comes unwound in the 1960s. Whether it's through intuition or luck or simply being in the right place at the right time, George Wallace always seems to anticipate this.
If you'll sit down, ladies and gentlemen, I can drown that crowd out. If you'll just sit down, I'll drown them out. All he needs is a good haircut. If he'll go to the barber shop, I think they'd cure him.
He's the first one, in many cases, to raise these issues, to speak bluntly, frankly. That appeals to a large minority, and it's always a minority, but a large minority of Americans who finally say, we have a politician who's not going to give us some mealy mouth on the one hand and on the other, but he's going to tell it like it is. Even if it's offensive to some people, so what?
After the 1968 defeat, George Wallace returned to Montgomery, Alabama, to his modest suburban home. He was now a single parent, raising his younger children, Peggy, George Jr., and Lee. But the widower kept a busy schedule. He traveled, raised money, and looked toward the 1972 presidential race. Also, a new love entered his life, someone raised in politics, who easily shared the spotlight and even drew some of her own. She was Big Jim Folson's niece, a former beauty queen, the recently divorced Cornelia Ellis Snively.
First of all, Cornelia was a beautiful woman. She was a knockout. She had raven-colored hair. She could fill out a pair of blue jeans. I mean, she would turn a head. And she turned George Wallace. He always liked the looks of a good-looking woman. And she was younger, and I'm sure she came on strong to George Wallace, and he was smitten with her.
There was a lot of physical attraction, very passionate kind of love between us. I had known him all my life, and I didn't really think he was attractive when I was younger, but at the time I saw him and got reacquainted with him when I was not a married person and a single person. He was very attractive to me then. And I guess I was very attractive to him.
The courtship with Cornelia remained discreet, while Wallace planned his next political move. Money continued to trickle into his national election headquarters in Montgomery, and he still had popularity. A Gallup poll of America's most admired men showed George Wallace in 7th place, just ahead of the Pope. But one fact was clear to Wallace and observers alike. If he didn't retake the Alabama governor's office, he'd lose his political base, and his national aspirations would be over.
Hello, Americans. I'm Paul Harvey. George Wallace is fighting this time for his political life, you know. He must run for governor again or be relegated to political oblivion. And yet, you know, despite his sustained popularity with the electorate, running for governor is not quite as simple as it sounds. He must run against his own political protege, the now popular Governor Albert Brewer. Inevitably, this is going to have to be a no-holds-barred campaign involving divided insiders and influenced by prominent interested outsiders.
Wallace's opponent, Governor Albert Brewer, was stronger than ever. Alabama law now allowed him to run for a second consecutive term, and he soon had a secret advantage: the financial support of the President of the United States. Wallace had come close to costing Richard Nixon the election in 1968, and the President was not going to let it happen again. Red Blunt, a Nixon cabinet member from Alabama, thought Brewer could beat Wallace and drive him out of presidential politics. All Brewer needed, Blunt said, was a little help from his friends.
There came a time when the president received Red Blunt and me to discuss the Wallace situation. Red carried a message from Governor Brewer, the effect of which was that he'd be willing to run given the proper inducements. Well, that was an easy call for the president. He said, by all means, give him whatever inducements he needs.
Nixon ultimately provided some $400,000 in secret cash payments, nearly a third of Brewer's campaign budget.
Criticized beyond belief after the fact, but to this day and to my death, I will defend it as one of the cleanest contributions you could get. They didn't want a job, they didn't want a contract, they didn't want anything. All they wanted was to beat Wallace. What can you do? What's wrong with that?
Nixon's plan seemed to be working. The incumbent Brewer, a moderate, was gaining momentum and had the support of Alabama's black electorate. It appeared George Wallace's time had passed.
All right. Wallace, pointing to national politicians and publications out to get me, protesting that George Wallace has nobody for him but the people, is right now outgunned. But he's not yet outmaneuvered.
I never will forget, we had a meeting of all the faithful, all the staff and so forth, and the governor addressed everybody and said, look, we got to do what we've got to do. We've got to play, he didn't say the race card, but it was obvious what he wanted. And he says, we've got to just go all out on this issue.
We didn't think they could. We were living in the dream world of thinking that maybe this issue had it's 1970. They've seen the troubles, the tragedies provoked in large degree by Wallace's stand. Maybe times have changed. But the campaign began, and it was absolutely like nothing this state had ever seen.
What about what you say about your opponent?
I say nothing about my opponent.
How about your supporters?
I don't know what my supporters say.
They had smear sheets saying that Brewer is a homosexual, his wife was a drunk, one daughter was pregnant by a black. It was just terrifying.
Governor, what do you know about these obviously doctored photographs showing Governor Brewer with Elijah Muhammad and Cassius Clay, or Muhammad Ali?
On election day, I'm sitting in my office, and I got a call from North Alabama from a campaign worker who says, the Wallace people are just going up and down the line saying, remember you're white, remember you're white. He said, what can I say? How can I rebut that? And I said, you can't. There's nothing you can say. And it made the difference.
There's no reason to let any one group call all the shots in this state. And you know the militant black bloc vote in this state, if they take over, it's going to control politics for the next 50 years in Alabama. And I know you're not going to let that happen.
And I guess that meant we were doing what we had to do, but he won the race. He became the governor.
We present to you the next governor of Alabama, Governor George C. Wallace. Right in, Miss Lee, on here, would you? If things were not running as good as they are running now, and I was running behind, I could probably tell you national newsmen that I wouldn't have you to kick around anymore.
The joke was at Richard Nixon's expense. A play on his famous quote in defeat from 1962, "You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." The president's attempt to sway the election had failed. But the White House had another plan. The IRS had already launched an investigation of George Wallace and some of his close supporters.